Hello everyone. Welcome to this Hackney Society talk, which is by Dorley Brown, a renowned photographer, about his research into the history of Hackney Wick and how he has captured its continued transformation through photography for over 30 years. I'm Jessica Webb, and I have been a councillor for the ward of Hackney Wick for 20 years, and it is my honour to be acting as host in this talk. I'll be chatting with Chris live at the end of his presentation. If you are watching live, you are invited to ask a question of Chris and his work. You'll need to be signed into YouTube with a Google account. You'll be able to view his talk and the Q&A after tonight's event, as it is being recorded. But watching live is your opportunity to participate. So do type any questions in the chat as you think of them during the talk, and I'll put them to Chris at the end. So without further ado, over to Chris.
Thanks, Jessica, and hi everyone. Thanks very much for asking me to do this talk. I'm not going to say very much beforehand because I'm sure you'll be sick of my voice in 40 minutes time. But if you've been watching the football, then we're in a different world all of a sudden. So anyway, so let's have a look at some pictures of Hackney Wick. So picture number one is my first project, which I did that had anything to do with Hackney Wick. And this is 1986, and it's the detonation of Highworth Point, which was one of 7 blocks on the Trowbridge Estate. And in those days, I was curious about expanding my knowledge of Hackney through photography. And that's really been how I've approached my work, is by using it as a tool of discovery and recording what is in front of me. It's not a conceptual body of work. It's an archive. Though of course, when you're starting out, you don't really consider it as such. You're trying to make good photographs, and you're trying to find context for those photographs. Council estates at this time was that they were being slated for demolition, so it struck me as a good idea to go around and take pictures of all the tower blocks before they blew them up or they removed them. So I went to Hackney Council and to the archives at Rose Littman, and I said, could I have a look at all your pictures of the buildings over 9 stories, which was what I called a tower block, because I'd like to see your collection of these buildings, which have been here relatively short time. They grew up in the aftermath of the Second World War. They were very radical in their design. They were sort of huge, imposing on the landscape. And I thought it was kind of odd that they didn't have any. They told me they didn't have any. And I said, well, would you like some? And they said, oh, all right, yeah, but we haven't got any money. But I managed to get, I think, 300 quid out of them or something. And it was kind of 6 months work. So work out what I was being paid a day for this. But the demolition program had in fact started in 1985. This is 1986, and it was the second block in the Trowbridge Estate. If you go to the next slide, we'll see the estate as it looked like in 1987 after those first 2 had been demolished. So you can see it was in a bit of a, this is shot from just over the other side of the river, but the sort of neglect and disinterest is quite evident, I think, and you can tell from that picture. The blocks were actually, they were bought off the shelf, like a design and build idea, and they were a French design of some buildings that had been built in Algeria, and the annual rainfall in the town in northern Algeria where they were built equaled about where the annual rainfall, was negligible. 1 day's rainfall in Hackney was sort of 10 times more. And they didn't last. They actually like blotting paper, and the design of them all, the stress was on the outside. the concrete just soaked up all the damp and they started falling apart. So that was one of the reasons they came down. If we go to the next slide, you can see what happened in the first demolition of Trowbridge Estate. That's the actual sort of moment that the explosive was detonated. And you can see in those days, they didn't put this kind of wrap around the buildings. They literally used to sort of nuke them, and the dust and asbestos and what was in them just floated out over the people watching. And the next slide, you can see how it happened, how it ended up. It didn't go down. That building on the right is as far as it went down. So we had this thing called the Leaning Tower of Hackney. I think someone on Radio London, Derek Jameson, he was commentating live for Radio London, and he coined this phrase, the Leaning Tower of Hackney, and it I think it sort of cemented people's kind of preconceptions of the borough and the whole sort of attitude to modern buildings. They couldn't even knock them down, you know. So that's why it was so vigorous when they blew up the second one, which was that first colour one, and you can see it almost was like being hit by a missile, you know. They weren't taking any chances. But I think out of the 120 tower blocks in Hackney, after they'd demolished about 20 of them, they stopped. And that's simply because it was obvious that it wasn't really about the buildings falling into disrepair, which was the issue. It was about how they were maintained and how they were kept up. So we still have most of them, even though many of them have been sort of reclad and, well, that's recladding is another story. We won't go into that right now, but anyway, it sparked my interest in the borough in general, you know, and I wanted to find out more and try to invent reasons to make more photographs in Hackney Wick. And when the aerial photography archive was put on, I think it's called Britain from Above, about 15 years ago. Well, it was one of the first places. If we go to the next slide, you can see Hackney Wick in the early 20s. These pictures were taken on a glass plate camera out from a biplane, which must have been incredibly difficult. But the project was extensive and mapped the whole of Britain. And it's free to look at online. And seeing Hackney Wick from above shows you the extent of what kind of place it was. Not vast in terms of heavy industry over a big area, but a very concentrated area of technological innovation. The first dry cleaning, for instance, the first plastics, the first place to refine crude oil into petrol, the first British place that made vulcanized rubber, a big confectionery industry, Clarnicos were based there. And it was the kind of equivalent of Silicon Valley to the late 19th and early 20th century Britain. It was almost like a laboratory of trying out things, inventing things, testing things. So that's the kind of context I want to look at Hackney Wick in, is its recent history. I'm not going to go back into its ancient history. You can read your Ian Sinclair for that. But the recent history and the industrial history and its subsequent development, which kind of culminated in the Olympics, was a kind of, you know, a sequence of mostly successes and some disasters. I'm going to jump back to the demolition in the next slide, if you could put that up. This gives, these two flyers came out at the same time as the demolition of Highworth Point. The one on the left is one that was given out by the local council, and it was kind of come and watch, you know, it's going to be a spectacle. You know, Sunday, September. It was kind of an event that you're supposed to come and enjoy. Pretty gruesome when you think about what kind of chemicals were being released into the air, and also not something that I think was worthy of, you know, of a celebration. But it did seem to be that they were expecting this to be as a roller coaster project that would last. And then conversely, you had class war, which used the tower blocks kind of crumbling as a signifier of gentrification, like the crumbling tower blocks in the distance and the fine houses in the foreground with the sort of the Bullingdon guy in the top hat. Those were two flyers that you might have seen stuck to lampposts around that time. Just to put it into context, what sort of era we're talking about. So if we go to the next slide, you can see one of the Trowbridge buildings being built. This is in 1965. It was quite a long build. I think they finished them in 1970 and people moved in 71. So given the fact they started knocking them down in 85, you had a 14-year period of maximum occupancy for these buildings, which is nothing. And the next slide you'll see, which is from 1972, which is the last picture that Hackney Archives had in relation to the buildings or the estate, the low rise, and you can see the part of the high rise, which is a sort of a very well lit kind of typical 1970s scene with the milk float, very sparse, kind of ample parking, and still looking like it would have done in the architect's kind of plans, that this would be an ideal place to live outside of the ghetto in some fresh air. So let's jump back in time now on the next one, and you'll see White Post Lane on the left in 1888, which if you can see that, basically you've got a horse and cart and a kind of dirt track going over the bridge at White Post Lane, and this White Post Lane is where the road crosses the cut, the Riverlea Navigation Cut. So you've got the Queen's Yard is on the left, King's Yard is on the left in the distance. The white building, the Crate Brewery, is now on the left of that shot. And then a couple of years later, 1910. You've got this shot which is showing the speed of the development of that area. You've got the road's widening, it's been tarmac properly, and you've got industrial buildings being built. And if you can see those two women on the left, towards the left of centre in that right-hand picture, in the most incredible sort of Edwardian black, sort of, they almost look like they're in mourning. So these were two images that were held by Hackney Council. And then if moving to the next one, you can see how I use those pictures to create a new photograph of people going to work on the Olympic site in 2010, a sort of mist morning, but the same road, the same view, a bit lower than those other two ones because the building they were taken from had been demolished. So that's frequently how I would start to use photographs as a starting point. And then moving on to the next one, we have in Queen's Yard. You can just see it's very faint, but you can see the remains of Ashiel Sayre, which was the first dry cleaners, sort of industrial-sized dry cleaners. Ashiel was a Parisian who came over to London and invented the process of dry cleaning using carbon tetrachloride. And the next few pictures will show you what that building looked like in its heyday. So if you could jump forward, this is one of the upper floors, which now in Queen's Yard, showing the finishing of the dry cleaners. See the amount of people being employed. This is 1921. Quite a rapid development for these new industries. beautiful set of pictures. I think there's about 5 of them being held in Hackney Council archives. Though oddly enough, they belong to Waltham Forest for some reason, and I don't know if there was a boundary change or, strictly speaking, it's in Tower Hamlets, even though it's called Hackney Wick. Most of Hackney Wick is in fact in Tower Hamlets, which is something that the burghers of Tower Hamlets aren't very happy about, but no one's going to change it to Tower Hamlets Wick, are they? So Hackney Wick it is. The next couple of pictures which are on the show 2 more pictures taken in Ashiel. We got on the one on the right, you've got this kind of heavy black tar process, which seems to be all men, and on the left mostly women on an upper floor doing finishing and ironing. But beautiful set of pictures, kind of half posed, using natural light, and photography wasn't easy in those days, so they probably would have been quite long exposures. On the other side of Hackney Wick, which is now Mabley Green, if you go forward, now this is something that isn't there's not very much information about this, and I don't know why, it was a military installation, which it certainly was. But this was the National Projectile Factory, which was built at the beginning of the First World War to basically, as a metal forge to make the brass casings for the shells, the big shells that were used on the front in the First World War. So the gunpowder would come down from Enfield, where it was made upriver, and then it would be packed into brass casings. There's very, very little information about this. The only picture I have of it is the one taken from above in 1921, which when its kind of work was done. But then I discovered the work of a painter called Anna Airy, who was commissioned to make paintings of the war effort in the First World War. And she made this fantastic painting, which is on the next slide, of the forge at Hackney Wick. So you can see the red hot shell casings coming off. Gives you some idea what the inside of that building was like. That's Mabley Green. And if you look on a contemporary image of Mabley Green, you'll see that there's still a sort of outline of it. You can go forward to this is the image on the right is the white building where the Crate Brewery is, and that's a shareholders meeting, a profit sharing meeting in 1920. Circa 1920, don't know the exact date of these two, but these 2 pictures are from the Clarnico Sweet Factory. So it gives you some idea of the amount of people involved who were employed by these companies down at Hackney Wick, and the very sort of formal, sort of pictorial way that they were photographed. Well, you know, definitely as a thing of pride to be looked at and shared and advertised as part of the British Empire's technological sort of innovation. So if we go forward to slightly, these are both from the Blitz in 1940. That shows some of the damage that was incurred at Hackney Wick. If you go forward again, we got Darrow, which was called Spiegelstein's when it started. That was in White Post Lane. They made metal castings, and it closed in a couple of years, well, about 5 years ago. And the guy on the right there is Robert Stone, sitting in front of the picture of his grandfather, Solomon Spiegelstein. This was one of the kind of few remaining old Hackney Wick businesses, and I was photographing them for a commission. So if you move forward, you can see Darrow's or Spiegelstein's. You can see the coming out on a lunch break. Look at that, absolutely full of people. And then you can see the metal castings being pressed in these huge presses. Okay, forward, please. This is one of the other few remaining industries that were there in 2013. This is Alga Works, where the wire rim glasses were made for the NHS. So they were churning out, I think, 15,000 pairs of wire rim glasses a week in the 40s and 50s and early 60s. And now well, when I took this picture, there was only, I think, 12 people employed on 2 floors, making just bespoke wire rim glasses, still with the old machine, but, you know, expensive glasses. And they, I think they changed their name to something like Mayfair Rims or something like that, you know. And they've moved to, they've now moved to Spain or Italy, I think. So that process has gone, but that was a bit of evidence of the last kind of end of it. Then on the next slide, Zamo Bleach. This is Terry and Julie, of course, amazing name. Anyone who knows the song Waterloo Sunset by the Kinks with Terry and Julie, of course, that referred to Terry Stamp and Julie Christie, but Terry and Julie, they're still there. They're still making their bleach and pouring it into bottles and selling it. They're kind of wholesale bleach, one of the very last industries left on Hackney Wick. And the next slide is a flashback to 1936, and these are the 3 Freds. They were all called Fred. There were Fred Whitehouse, Fred Evans, and Fred Mockford, and they were sort of entrepreneurs. They were the sort of equivalent of Seb Coe and Boris and Ken Livingstone, you know, of their day. They're going to build this stadium for the Greyhound and the Speedway, which they did and became very popular. So this was kind of the first rumblings of what really sort of turned into the Olympics, was the Hackney Wick becoming less industrial, more of a place for leisure. And the next slide, you'll see the stadium, which is now where the Copper Box is, for those of you that know the area, the Copper Box Stadium. I mean, the Copper Box is now standing on where the Greyhound track was. So it was Greyhounds on Tuesdays and Thursdays and Speedway on Fridays and Saturday nights, and would pull a good crowd. And the next slide is one of the early programs from the Speedway. Another thing that was kind of instrumental in the development of the site for the Olympics was the 1964 Abercrombie with the Greater London Plan. And they produced a booklet in 1964, and you can see. I mean, this is 1964. They were thinking of the canals as a place. I mean, it's kind of close to what it looks like now, really, in a way. You know, boating as leisure, that didn't really happen, but there's an arena there. It was landscaped and very post-industrial. On the left, you see the Fun Palace, which was going to be run by Joan Littlewood as a sort of theatre and multimedia gallery. Very kind of far advanced for its day. And this was sort of kept on ice, really, but it really sowed the seed for the kind of for the Olympic plan being. I mean, none of this ever happened, but looking at those pictures now, it's quite remarkable. I mean, so jump to the next one. We've got this was taken in 1988, and it's the Yardley talcum powder factory, which is where the swimming pool is now in Hackney Wick. And I was quite busy taking pictures around this time, right up until the beginning of when they closed the zone for the Olympics. So if we go forward, you can see that was the site on the left was where the Yardley factory was. That's Marshgate Lane coming onto Carpenter's Road. So in the distance, you'd have the Olympic Stadium now. And the next one, you'll see that's actually where the Olympic Stadium is now, Marshgate Lane, and that was a glassworks. And the next slide, you'll see some of this is Foreman's Smoked Salmon Factory. And this was, it says 2012, don't blow our jobs. This was taken in 2005, so taken 7 years just after the announcement of the site being the proposed site for the Olympics and the successful bid. The store, I mean, I think Foreman Smoked Salmon Factory were the only people who actually got a new factory built for them. So they played a blinder in that one. They got a new factory. But that is the site now of the western side of the stadium. And these images are from that time, just after the bid was announced. And you can see it was very overgrown. You had a few businesses there, mostly to do with like lightweight metal manufacturing. I think there was a vinyl pressing, record vinyl pressing plant. There was like a Mercedes truck dealership, but it was very much winding down. If we move forward, you'll see the electricity pylons that used to roam across the area, which they were taken down. The electrics was put underground, so that was the first thing they did. And the canals, as you can see, were very overgrown, but kind of beautiful. It was a nice place to go if you wanted to get away, if you wanted to sort of immerse yourself in a wilderness, but really didn't want to go very far. So I used to go up there quite a bit. And the next one, similar kind of views of that canal. I think these were a bit early. These were in 2002. And then the next one, remnants of industry, overgrown canals. It was very sort of bucolic. I really liked going up there and taking pictures. You had a very strong sense of it being a place where something used to happen, something important used to happen. You could tell by the, just the stuff that was lying around that it had a very, very rich history. But it was only really after I took these that I started researching in any great detail about really what was going on. Another archival image from the early 20s, which was one of the locks at Old Ford being put in. So it's rare that you see a picture. That comes from British Waterways. And then something I do quite frequently is to juxtapose two images side by side. So you've got the same view exactly. The left-hand one is 2002 and the right-hand one is 2012. And in the left-hand picture, you can see the bigger Clarnico factory, which was built, I think, in the early 1930s. And that became a very large industrial estate later on. And now on the right, you can see the copper box on that site there. The railway line just up by Hackney Wick station. Keep going, and then we've got some more juxtapositions. On the left, it's 1958. On the right, it's 2011. You see, this is what just before the motorway was put in, or well before the motorway. In fact, from Cadogan Terrace, you could go down this long cobbled slope right into Hackney Wick. There was no sort of delineation between Hackney Wick and the rest of Hackney, which the A12 road to the Blackwall Tunnels sort of cut off. And there was, I met someone who said they used to just walk and see their auntie, and now when the road was put in, they had to walk a sort of 1.5 mile detour to go and visit her. So they did end up putting these footbridges in, but both these pairs, the right and the left, are taken from exactly the same viewpoint. So you can really see what happened in terms of creating a Hackney Wick as a sort of isolated geographical and separate area, which is one of the reasons why it became very quiet. Not many people used to go there because most of the sort of the ways that you could go there were cut off. So moving on, this is not a juxtaposition, the same view. This is where the Kingsmead estate was where these the timber wharf was. You can see the size of those logs, amazing. That picture was taken in 1966, and the one on the right was taken in 1937 of the Millfields power station, which was demolished in the 1980s. So it gives you some idea of the scale of the industry and the aesthetic sort of power they had for photographers in those days. And then moving on, you've got 1948. That's looking at Ingram's rubber factory, just where the little square is now, where the Hackney Pearl used to be. This is post-war. A lot of prefab houses, because a lot of the houses were bomb damaged, so people were living in prefabs. And Ingram's was still going until the 80s, and now it's the site of Oslo House, if you know where Oslo House is. Moving on, we've got the same view taken in 2005 and 2011. The one on the left is sort of a half-hearted attempt at 1980s regeneration, which never got finished. So that was pulled down and replaced by the flats that you see on the right, with just a glimpse of the stadium coming into view. And then moving on further on up east, the Greenway. This is the view west from the top end of the Greenway, where the view tube is. Okay, I know we're maybe getting out of Hackney Wick a little bit, but I put the Olympic Zone and the Greenway into the Hackney Wick because it's so much connected with the story. And this picture is from 1999. So it was a low point. It was a bit of a shit dump, if you want the honest truth. Lot of fly tipping, old cars wrecked and stuff. Interesting to photograph for me because I was aware that it was a temporary situation. And then in 2013, I started photographing. This is the Eaton Manor Rowing Club, the gym upstairs. Again, it felt like it was in its last days, even though it's still there now. I'm not sure if anyone's using it very much. I don't see anyone rowing from it now. And most of the people who were using it they were quite old, and they weren't getting the boats out so much. And the gym upstairs caught my eye for some reason. It sort of summed up what the old Hackney Wick was, and also the bingo club on the Trowbridge Estate. Very lively scene. Mostly women, mostly over the age of 75, in their twice weekly bingo club, and yeah, had a lot of fun there. This is I've forgotten the name of the road. Anyone help me out on the name of the road? It's the railway bridge that goes over the it's just next to the pub. All right, move on. We'll forget about that one. This was a typical scene. This is a bit further on down at the sort of bow end. This is 2009. Talking to a couple of guys. It turned out they were both Ukrainian. They hadn't been in England that long, and they were getting 50p each tyre that they got rid of. So they were basically going around in a truck, taking tyres off garages and slinging them in this old warehouse, and they were getting 50p a time for doing that. So there was a bit of entrepreneurial spirit going on, and they were quite happy for me to take their picture. Another typical scene of the sort of pre-Olympic Wick and what the old warehouses were being used for. So moving on, this is the white building where the Crate Brewery is, and these two pictures, identical viewpoint but taken only a year apart. It was a print shop. The joke was, porn by night and counterfeit money by day. That was the kind of joke what the printers were knocking out. That closed down in 2010. Literally, it looked like they just walked out halfway through a day's work and left all the machinery there and their sort of page 3 pin-ups glued to the wall, and it was just that was it, game over. And then a year later, it was a party venue. So that was the morning after one of the parties. Okay. Again, picture taken from the same viewpoint in 2011. You can see the Mittel Tower being built, and the stadium being put together, and the view tube, which was then a sort of place where you could come and enjoy the spectacle of the stadium being built. And it was very busy. Good place to have a coffee and hang out. You could see the Olympics kind of coming. It was kind of optimism. If you were optimistic about things like the Olympics, people were enjoying that experience of watching it happen. And now the visual spectacle of the Olympics has been completely obscured by the Bobby Moore Academy School and trees and a bridge that has appeared, which goes from the view tube to the lockups. And there's a guy there now who mends bicycles. So completely different sort of change of use of the same spot, and in the space of 10 years, completely changing its usage and its meaning. So I like to put these pictures side by side. Moving on, we have another set of pairs. This gives you some idea of the very minimal space they were squeezing buildings into. This kind of, the one at the top is this area down by the canal, which was just about enough room for a 3-story, very narrow block of flats on what looked to be a tiny little sort of perch beside the canal. And the bottom one we've seen already, so we can move on from that. This is Roach Road, the Counter Cafe, which was a nice place to have a cup of coffee back in the day. This is just before the Olympics, so you had the spectre of the stadium emerging, and then you had the man with the fixie bike there, the sort of hipster scene moving in, and on the right you've got the two property speculators sort of imagining where their flats are going to be. And you could tell from the activities that were going on that what you were witnessing was a very temporary situation. Artist studios, very relaxed, very calm place, cheap rent, nice place to work. But it was very obvious that the time, the clock was running on it. And if we move on, you can see the same spot as it was last week. From the identical viewpoint. Now the stadium is almost obscured. The Counter Cafe is gone and replaced by a block of flats, and instead of the man with the fixie, you have the couple walking the dog, which is the sort of the new rock and roll, so they tell me. All right, moving on. Again, the other end of Roach Road, you've got industrial. This is a sort of 10-year gap. The old beer vat where the brewery was, where the beer was stored. On the right, the block of flats, and at the bottom you've got complete sort of re-landscaping from an industrial road system, Marshgate Lane, which is now the centre of the Olympic Park. Moving on, some of these will be quite obvious. We've done that one. Move on again, please. Sorry about that. Yeah, this was in the run-up to the Olympics. Now, you never used to see people running beside the canal. It was sort of like not a place where any kind of leisure took place. It was kind of, you might see a few odd fishermen, but I don't know what state the water was in, but it was definitely a sort of no-go area. Now it's being opened up into places for leisure to run beside. And at the same time, you had the old industry just hanging on. This is Swan Yard, which was actually used to be a stable for horses, for the canal horses, in its last days as an upholsterer. Now they've gone. And at the top you see Fridge Mountain, which was the infamous Fridge Mountain. That's taken in 2002. And on the right now it's the site of where the V&A, the new V&A museum, is going to be. That's a 20-year gap between those two. And at the bottom you have, well, it's pretty self-explanatory. The canals, the overgrown canals, becoming the Mittel Tower and the Olympic Stadium, both taken from exactly the same viewpoint. And then in the run-up to the Olympics, the sort of the so-called arson attack on the fire that just so happened to occur in a warehouse that contained 20,000 tyres. And I think the quickest way to get rid of them was to torch them. So yeah, the American gangster poster was quite appropriate, but you could see the plume of smoke from Southampton. It was huge. One of the biggest peacetime fires ever, but it was never, the cause of it was never looked into in any great detail, and very, very little news about it ever emerged, because by that time it was inside a kind of closed off Olympic zone, so no one really had access to it. But yeah, that was one of the spectacles, of which there were many, like the Olympic Stadium being built. This is 2009 from the Greenway, and then the next slide you'll see a view that's no longer possible, Hackney Wick, from the bridge going over the station. This is like another pre-Olympic image of that very high concentration of industrial buildings, all of which are still there, but they're in the process of change. And the next slide, you'll see the evening that they tested the Olympic floodlights from the same viewpoint. So you see the artist studios in the foreground, and then in the background you've got the halogen, burning halogen of these floodlights as they tested the floodlights for the Olympics, which were still 18 months away at this point. Other activities emerged now, like the shooting of the Visa card advert with Steve Redgrave in his rowing boat in the middle. And when the actual advert was put on telly, they completely covered the whole thing in snow, which they'd done obviously in post. So even though this was shot in winter on a very sort of on a wintry kind of morning, when the advert came out, the whole scene was very sort of bucolic, with the canal boats covered in enamel pots and a fine covering of snow, and it was all about the sort of run up to the Olympics. And of course, one of the interesting things about the Olympics was that they never mentioned, the BBC coverage never mentioned where we were, with Hackney Wick or its history or a fantastic place where we were. They completely ignored the location completely. They did a few aerial shots, and the opening ceremony obviously was kind of was interesting if you were a local. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see the opening night, the fireworks. But still, you had kind of people in the foreground who were sort of a bit more interested in their phones and where they could meet their friends, even though this kind of this thing was going on. And it was in some ways a sort of reawakening of the kind of industrial imagery in a way, that it was about like big spectacle, big power, big money, all kind of converging on this one spot. So in a way, Hackney Wick was perfect for the Olympics. Really, it was it was the next step, the obvious next step. And a few shots of the sort of the security that was occurring. This is the hockey stadium, which looked more like a sort of high security prison, you know, with the sort of lookouts and the steel fencing. And you thought, well, what is all this really about? You know, I don't know, but all I could do was make images of that moment that hopefully would either talk to me or other people at some point later on in history. And then moving on, you've got some of the shots during the Olympics in the temporary structure that was around the swimming pool. And the next one was you've got the stadium at its absolute height. This is during the Paralympics. In fact, the guy who had the amazing paddle legs, who murdered his girlfriend, the South African guy, had just come second. This was the moment it all started going tits up for him. He was beaten into second place by the Brazilian, and that was the end of his reign. I can't remember his name at the moment. I don't really want to be honest. So this was the stadium as it looked during the games, and then next slide is a few pictures, again, going back to the pre-Olympic history, the Crate Brewery, when it was closed down, covered in graffiti and rubbish, just waiting for something to happen. And then to juxtapose with the car repair shops that were down there, patriotism and VW parts, many of those. Good place to go and get a spare window for your motor. So it was useful. Now it's the V&A, the BBC, the pool, the colleges, the leisure, the park, the sort of esplanade of, very nice actually. I go cycle back from work there every day. It's a nice spot, but always in a state of fluxus, you know, things happening, things changing. And then finally we get to the Lord Napier, which has sort of become a symbol right in the heart of Hackney Wick, a symbol for its change. This was taken during a snowstorm at the end of 2010. And it always had a new paint job, like every few months. And I'd never seen any pictures of it as it used to be. But in the next picture, you'll see how it developed over that 10-year period. This is 2017, when it really was kind of game over for this part of the Wick. The height of the cranes gives you some idea of the height of the buildings that are going to appear. And the old pub carrying the message, the very pertinent message about what's happened in the recent history of Hackney Wick. And then moving on, you have what that view looks like now. So only in a 4-year gap have you got this transformation occurring. The Lord Napier now is being restored to its former glory, though they are keeping the graffiti because obviously that's the whole point. It's got to look like a place where artists hang out, though most artists I know don't approve of graffiti because it's very sort of formulaic. Here's a shot, 1967 on the left, with the low bus, the RLH, I think it was called, which was low to go under the bridges. This is 1967. You got almost a 50-year gap to the one on the right, where you can see the tile work of the pub being exposed again for the first time in 45 years. So it's a kind of cycle. And then on the left, 1977, the middle, 2011, and on the right, 2021. And that's a good point to end on. Thank you.
Before we get to the Q&A, just to say that there's a link to Chris's website. It's in the link section in the text below the video on YouTube. And you'll also find the link to sign up to the Hackney Society's mailing list. Now, the Hackney Society's next event is our AGM, which, COVID permitting, will be at the Newington Green Meeting House on Wednesday, 22nd of September. And more details will be announced nearer the time. COVID, government guidance, all permitting. Thank you, Chris. That was a great, varied, an incredible, I would say, eclectic mix, which is a fine reflection of what Hackney is. I'm looking at the questions that have come in, and I'm just going to take them through as they came in. Now, Stokey Sue has asked a question: does anyone know when Clarnico closed? I lived on the south coast and remember many of the sweet treats along the promenade were made by them. Now, I'm not putting you on the spot, Chris, because while we're talking, I Googled it.
Yeah.
And the history of Clarnico is incredible. As you say, we saw a picture of the profit sharing meeting. It's one of the first, feels like a socialist workers cooperative where the workers shared the profits. But yeah, it's bought up by Trebor and it closed in 1973.
Yeah. I would have imagined something like that. So many of the companies have been sort of bought up by bigger ones and merged into things. And I wouldn't have even been surprised if the Clarnico brand still existed in some form, but the sweets definitely aren't made in Hackney Wick anymore.
It's Trebor, and then apparently Cadbury. You know, it's just one of those stories of universal conglomerates buying out competition, and then the change in the industry. We have a bit of trivia. Apparently, older locals used to pronounce the Lord Napier pub as Lord Napier rather than Napier.
Yeah.
You come across that, Chris?
I have, and that only because I've met Wiggy. Now, anyone who knows anything about Hackney Wick knows about Wiggy, who was the sort of gatekeeper of the Eat Manor Boys Club, and he pulled me up on that. He said, "Oh no, it's not the Napier, it's the Napier." But I can't bring myself to say it because I never used to go in there, and it would be a bit sort of arch of me to start saying the Napier. But I've heard that one before. Yeah. Thanks for that reminder.
And one of the, is it a survivor? I mean, somehow those walls have survived. Maybe it was the graffiti that was holding together. But yeah, coming back. Oh, Chris, that road that it's on the corner of, the road going underneath the railway bridge, that's Wallace Road.
Wallace Road, yeah. Of course, I can remember it now, but in the heat of the moment, my mind...
Absolutely. You've got Wallace Road and you've got White Post Lane, and they go all over the place and make no sense whatsoever. Pretty much like the Trowbridge map, if you ever have to deliver leaflets like I do.
Yeah.
It's a nightmare. It makes no sense from how the roads used to be, old style roads, then, how it's changed, and then just trying to find an address is a post person's logistical nightmare.
I bet, yeah.
Terrible.
Thanks for the reminder, yeah.
We have a question, Hamish Stewart. Yes, Hamish. Chris, what are your views about how urban space is repurposed? I live in one of the new developments, and the area is changing very fast at the moment.
Well, I always kind of explain it to myself that these things are cyclical or cyclical, if we're getting into pronunciation. But we say cyclical, don't we? So, which was why I kind of showed some of those old pictures, like, there's been a stadium before and it was demolished, and there's a new stadium. There's been manufacturing there, and now there's breweries coming along and people serving funky types of food. In some way, the big sort of cranes of the old industry are being echoed by the huge cranes that are building all these buildings. So I see a sort of mirror in all the developments that actually it's kind of happened on some scale before, but now, because we're different and we want different things, it's going to be different things that you'll be seeing down at Hackney Wick. But the physical, the visual phenomena of those changes, of big buildings going up and getting blown up and then reappearing, and then they'll go and then something else will happen, is a cycle that seems to be echoed in all of my work, which is all based in East London. And pretty much anywhere you go, you get this very strong sense of, boom and bust and troughs and peaks and cycles of development. The photographers were, some of the pictures that I like looking at from archive material show some kind of spectacle. Sometimes it was the Blitz, tragic events like that. Sometimes it was the interiors of manufacturing. Sometimes it was a packed West Ham stadium. So they inform me about where it was interesting photographers. That's my business, so that's what I'm interested in and what I'm hoping to continue. And the only way I can answer the question is that I think it is an ongoing cycle, and at the moment we're witnessing a sort of a peak of some kind as it changes context and changes meaning, and all these new buildings are emerging. And it makes me think what's going to be left of them in 50, 60, 100 years, and how they'll be used. Maybe the artists will move back, or the they'll become affordable again, and it will be a bit of a wreck, a place to slow down and consider life. And at the moment, it's just a place really that you're only encouraged to drink, eat, and buy flats. So what does that say about us? You know.
I mean, it does. You know, your talk shows the incredible change that's happened in Wick, and I struggle to think of an area that has had such a transformation. Historical, deep industry, and fairly toxic in some respects. You know, the and again, if you want to say cyclical, what they did has become known to us. You know, the toxic smells from when they have been digging down and laying foundations. But what, you know, it was only the Olympics that brought the money and the political will and the money to cook the ground, to take out the toxic side of our industrial past, so that it could be used, you know, safely for new purposes, or any kind of purpose, really. But if you look at how, you know, from the A12, the housing, it's turned, you know, the dramatic waves and the changes of that housing, you know, from workers, cottages, tower blocks, they came down, large, low density residences in the Trowbridge, and again, intense high rises stepping over into the Olympic Park. And, you know, we've done our best to keep the creatives, keep the artists that came in when the industry went. And as you say, the industry, do we have that industry anymore? We have a social industry. You know, we didn't have that. You know, you wouldn't have come to the Wick for a social event, would you? And now, you said, you know, you wouldn't have run along the canal. You wouldn't have gone to Hackney Wick as a place to stop and have a evening out. Whereas, you know, people were encouraged not to get off the train and to continue somewhere safer.
There was quite a lot of people who were very anti the Olympics. A lot of Hackney Wick locals, as I'm sure you'll remember. It wasn't all positivity. I mean, I was looking forward to this, just to the sort of, you know, the visceral sort of spectacle of them. Being a local, I was looking forward to the Olympics because I thought, well, this only happens once in your life, that they have an Olympic Games on your doorstep and all that stuff. But on a daily basis, I was meeting people who were getting evicted because they couldn't afford it, and their way of life was you know, change. Or people who had allotments, you know, suddenly didn't have their allotment. They got them back now. They've made some new allotments. So there was a movement of dissent and resistance to it, which interested me, not as something to photograph because I'm not that clever, but like you say, if we hadn't had the Olympics, we might not have the situation we have now. But I suspect that that area probably would have been developed despite the Olympics, because, well, you know, you look at Canning Town or other similar areas, Stratford.
What we're going to say, Elephant and Castle.
Yeah. It's interesting to speculate on whether the Olympics somehow provided some impetus for some redevelopment. I'm sure it helped in that respect. It was the last time I remember, you know, the British being in any way sort of remotely proud of themselves.
Absolutely right. Yes.
Yeah.
But you're right, Chris, because I mean, you know, as a councillor, we certainly wanted to deal with, you know, people living here afraid of the Olympics, afraid of what was going to happen, that they couldn't step outside their door, they couldn't see their, I don't know, friends or family that they were caring for, or go to the shops. You know, it was going to be some strange lockdown. We really kind of sought to, and not just for the 2 weeks, but the legacy. It's just that the transformation has not stopped. The Wick that, you know, you've talked about and the changes keeps on going. Every time I walk down the road, Wick Station or come out of Wick Station, it is different. You look up and the view has changed. So it's, you know, it's exciting.
Yeah, and it reminds you of the, you know, spare a thought for the people who were actually up to their, you know, knees in chemicals in the 1920s. I mean, those pictures tell you what working conditions were like and what the consequences of that must have been like in terms of, you know, illness, poverty, this, that, and the other. Very short lives were being led, and I'm sure in those days, you know, a lot of people were drinking away the pain. And that is something that photography can tell you, other than it being a pictorial thrill, that it actually provides evidence of whatever, you know, whatever. I mean, the National Projectile Factory at Mabley Green, for instance, the size of it, dedicated to, you know, killing people 120 miles away. That is something worth considering when you go to Mabley Green now and look at people on the climbing wall or the boulder and playing football, and you think this all happened quite recently, you know, and it's often the photographs are evidence of a real brutality. So you have to kind of, you know, weigh that up against the brutality that was dished out in terms of the Olympics coming along. It was, you know, you have to put a bit of perspective on it, which was, you know, why I was kind of looking forward to it, because I like change. And, you know, you have to be careful. If you're just addicted to change, then you're going to get, you know, you're going to get what you ask for, but it's not always going to be great. And ways of life, you know, they change, they end, but new ones start. And you kind of, when you're as old as me, you kind of get to witness from one of the troughs to one of the peaks. You know, my job is just to stick a camera up in front of my face and press the button. You know, it's easy. I'm on a cushy number here, you know.
Are you still getting out every day? Able to?
I've just had the busiest year of my life, you know, because the
pandemic.
Because of the pandemic, yeah. Suddenly everyone wanted pictures of empty London streets, so I was working in the West End for the first time ever, you know, taking pictures of empty roads for Americans to look at in their magazines and stuff. So it was, yeah, I haven't stopped.
Again, I mean, what a crazy year. So we've got a juxtaposition between non-stop construction, you know, the most intense development really that I've seen, you know, after we've got through the Olympics, and how it's still going, with scenes of, I want to say, established landmarks that are completely empty.
Yeah.
Of action, of anything.
Yeah, and I mean, if you stop and think about it, there just simply isn't time, because there's always something that will just catch your imagination and cause you to become obsessed with it in the space of literally minutes, and you hang on to it for months and months, and you can't stop. And that's just the nature of the job, you know. It's there's always something to document, to record.
You don't get days of nothing.
Well, I mean, everyone has days of nothing, I guess. But yeah, if I was addicted to nothing, I wouldn't be living in Hackney.
No, true, indeed.
Yeah.
One of the things, and you touched on this, is the kind of the strange, I want to say the political geography, because it's not just Hackney, it is Tower Hamlets, and it's bordered now by the A12, used to be the railway. So we have the A12 that's kind of always seen as a kind of a barrier. Then you have the Trowbridge, and you've got the Cut, the Lee. We have a question, which is, do you ever envisage the A12 being removed or remodeled? And if you had the power, would you make that happen?
I would like to see the A12 become something like what they did to the A3, which was to grass it over. Yeah, and it become a sort of valley, because it's a sort of,
Yeah.
it is a valley, and I think it would be a beautiful greenway path where we could grow things and walk along, and we'd have to shift all the goods around some other way.
Oh, I'm just going to say trains, but I would say,
yeah, trains. What's wrong with trains? Or even
bring back the trains.
Yeah, or even canals. But yeah, I don't know. I'm sure it's a dream that will go unfulfilled in my lifetime, and the A12 will probably be the A12 forever. But it's yeah, when you go over it on the footbridge, you know you're inhaling a bucket load of carbon monoxide. And
those views from the top of the footbridge has given you some like a fine view to take pictures of change.
Yeah, yeah. But you know, the A12 is used roads in the city. You know, it's vital if you want to. I mean, you can be in Greenwich in 10 minutes from Hackney. Yeah. So you've got to. Looking on the bright side, there's something good about it.
It's been very useful. Okay, I've just got one more. What do you make of the reintroduction of light industry for an artisan market? So, for instance, the Truman Brewery in a total new form from the heavier industrial age.
Well, what are we, a nation of shopkeepers? No.
Brewers.
The brewers, yeah. I mean, it's the one thing you can say that is like, if you're walking around Hackney nowadays, there are breweries on every street corner.
Yes.
What do they call them? Boutique beers. Personally, I don't like them. I like a kind of good old pint of sludge. All these new beers, they're very lively, and you can feel them. They're still you drink them and
more filtered.
Yeah, I mean, it's too much, you know. But you know, it's work, isn't it? It's making beer. It's an old East End tradition. Nothing new about breweries going on in the East End. I
mean, if you think about the industry, as you said, it has turned to a service industry, almost an entertainment, so that people now come here to spend time to
look at the brewing process.
Yes, and look at the brewing process. Which
I think we're going to have transparent boards so we can see people kind of doing facsimiles of work, and that will be some kind of entertainment, you know. Yeah. I mean, I got nothing against breweries as such, you know. I like a pint now and again, so hats off to them, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, well, look, I think that's been an incredibly, I'd say, insightful. It's not just from the 80s. You have brought the history, those photographs, and it is thanks to photographers that have kept our understanding of the change that this area has had. Otherwise, it would just be, I like maps, but maps don't bring the people, the buildings, and the stories that they bring.
Yeah, and I must mention two photographers whose work I showed, who I didn't mention, which is David Christie and David Jones, who made the pictures of the Napier in the 60s.
Napier. No, it's a great one. It is indeed.
So I'd like to thank them for the use of those photographs.
Okay, thank you. Well, tonight's talk, along with most of our other recent online talks, are available to playback at any time on the YouTube channel. Click subscribe to be informed of any future videos automatically. Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much on behalf of the Hackney Society.
Thank you for asking me. It's very enjoyable. Thank you.
Okay, thank you again. All right.